Is M. Night Shyamalan the most overhated, underrated director of all time? A once beloved writer and director who was most famous, but now probably most infamous for his twist endings that he's contractually obligated to put in, that make or break his films. Upon revisiting all of his films, a couple of things really stood out to me. One, his ability to deliver some spectacular child performances. Two, man, this man loves a high concept sci-fi or horror premise. And so do I. But the main thing I noticed was his continual exploration of faith. Faith in humanity. Faith in people, faith in oneself, faith or lack thereof in a higher purpose or religion. M. Night Shyamalan tackles faith in so many complex and thought-provoking ways throughout his entire career that I found it to be the backbone of his filmography. All of his films, the good, the bad, and the ugly, are all discussing faith and challenging faith in new and intriguing ways that make his entire body of work not only utterly captivating, thoroughly fascinating, but also a glimpse into the mind of M. Night Shyamalan and his lifelong obsession and struggle with faith. Or maybe I've just misread the signs, and this is all just some kind of happy coincidence. Who's to say? At some point, M. Night Shyamalan became the punching bag of Hollywood. It became cool and popular to hate on him. But with 16 films and only a couple of truly atrocious ones, I think his ratio is actually really positive, and I do not think that this cultural filmmaking icon deserves the hate that he gets. That being said, he has made, and I say this with no exaggeration or hyperbole, the second worst film ever made. Number 1, you know who you are. Number 16, The Last Airbender. On paper, this has all the main ingredients for a delicious M. Night Shyamalan sandwich, so it really hurts to see M. Night Shyamalan tackle something like this and get it so wrong. A bad film about something you just don't really care about is one thing, but a bad film adaptation of something that you love that is amazing hurts in a very uniquely personal and painful way. This film falls short in every conceivable way. There is no redeeming features to this film whatsoever, which is not something I feel like I can say about almost any film. It is an abomination of an adaptation. The biggest issue for me is the cast. I hate all of these children, which is not something I want to say about any film or any child, but man, do I hate these kids. M. Night Shyamalan is a great director in so many different ways. One thing he cannot do is action. The action in this film is so lifeless and dull and laughably bad at times. It feels embarrassingly amateurish and doesn't have any of the kinetic energy and wonder and awe that you want to see from bending action. Another huge issue in the film, cutting from scene to scene with no coherence or flow. The film is so brief and rushed. So in honor of that, let's keep this mercifully brief and move on. Number 15, After Earth. Do you guys remember when Will Smith kept trying to make his son a legit actor and he put him in this big Hollywood blockbuster sci-fi film and he's like, he'll be the new Will Smith? And everyone in the world went, no? And somehow it's the second most embarrassing thing he's done for his family. This is maybe the least M. Night Shyamalan film. I think after Avatar, the studios had kind of lost faith in Shyamalan, and so he was no longer the auteur who could do anything he wanted, but instead he was just a gun for hire for this Smith family vanity project. This film reeks of nepotism, narcissism, and worst of all, bad acting. Despite Jaden Smith's amazing social media presence, his film presence is, what's the word? Atrocious. I don't mean to throw shade, and I don't know why I started a video about a director who is great at directing children with so many jabs at children. But here we go. He is so unprepared for this role, it's embarrassing. It hurts to watch. This is no Kurt Russell, Wyatt Russell situation. And worst of all, it's actually a pretty great idea, just horrid execution and horrendous acting. Number 14, Lady in the Water. A bizarre fairy tale about a magical water lady. The water lady lives in a pool in some apartment building owned by Paul Giamatti, and he has to try and help her get home via giant eagle? This should be better than it is. It gets weighed down by bizarre lore and an inconsistent tone and mood. Its visuals are kinda dull, and for such a bonkers, insane premise, the middle part of the film is oddly boring and dull. But the biggest negative of this film is unfortunately M. Night Shyamalan's extended cameo as a writer who is destined to write the greatest book ever created that will shape and mold and change society for the better. A literary savior whose words were going to make him a prophet of change. Yeah. Yikes! If there was any sense of irony or fun playfulness to this character and to the casting himself in this role, like a little bit of a wink and a nod, it might be something, but it is so self-serious, it just reeks of narcissism in the worst possible way. And on top of that, the only villainous character in the movie, if you can even call him that, is the obnoxiously, impossibly arrogant and smug film critic. Of course it's a film critic, whose snobbery and meta dialogue and just arrogance borderlines parody, but it just comes across as really mean-spirited and angry. There is a way to put in a film critic and have a kind of a jab and a punch back at people criticizing his work, but the way he does it in this film just feels really arrogant and mean-spirited and kind of like a kid having a sook. Rather than something really funny, clever, and inspired, nonsense lore, boring script, a mean-spirited, self-indulgent wank of a film. Number 13, Praying with Anger. This is M. Night Shyamalan's first film, a film that literally nobody in the world has seen. The only way I found to watch this was on YouTube in quality that I would describe as borderline unwatchable, and the film itself isn't great, but it's really interesting to see what M. Night Shyamalan did with essentially $23 and probably just a bunch of his friends. He stars as the lead in this film, and because of that fact, it feels like his most personal film. It follows an American Indian as he goes back home to India. It's a film about identity, cultural differences, and a man stuck between two worlds. About faith, about coming to terms with who you are as a person. And there's some really interesting stuff kind of buried underneath a kind of boring slog of a film. But the biggest twist of all is that M. Night Shyamalan's first directorial film doesn't feature a twist. Number 12, Glass. M. Night Shyamalan's The Avengers film, 20 years in the making. This film is almost brilliant, but in the end it doesn't come together for me and it completely falls apart. The first two acts of this film are spectacular, but I loathe the third act, and I feel like it kind of recontextualizes the entire film in the worst way possible. All of the twist reveals and big moments completely undermine everything that worked in the first two acts, and outright just make them essentially pointless. The film is so ambitious and creative and does so many thought-provokingly interesting things in those first two acts, and in the third act it's just like, let's have a punch-up in a car park and drown Bruce Willis in a puddle of water. The final act is especially frustrating since the entire premise of the film and the first two acts is this woman trying to convince these people who think they are superheroes that they're actually not superpowered at all, and she's trying to help them with their delusions. It's such an interesting subversion of the superhero genre that has changed so drastically since his first film Unbreakable 20 years ago. And then the third act, for it to devolve into just a big old punch-up, but in the most dull and uninspired way possible, it's just kind of deflating, embarrassing, and super underwhelming, and it's so frustrating and infuriating because the film is so good for so much of it, and then it's just maybe the worst end to any of his films. I much prefer Paulson as this psychiatrist who's trying to help these people with their delusions, but she knows that they are superheroes and is just trying to like gaslight them for some reason for this secret organization. A secret organization that meets in open restaurants that are just open to the public? Book a private room, guys. What are you doing? Number 11, Unbreakable. A slow burn film that has some really interesting ideas of what it means to be a superhero and tackles the idea of superheroes in such a unique and fresh and interesting way. I feel like it becomes more interesting the further we get into the superhero genre that's kind of taken over Hollywood for the last 10 or 15 years. It's also an absolute delight to revisit this era of cinema that is peak Bruce Willis. Some of the aspects in this film I don't really love. Bruce Willis's weakness to water comes to mind. It kind of comes across as quite silly for such a self-serious film. I really love some of the cinematography and the style of direction of this film. The villain's motivations are terrifying and the twist ending is really sad and tragic. I really like this film, but unfortunately I don't love it. Number 10, Wide Awake. M. Night's second film, and his second unknown and unheard of film, is an underrated gem. Don't let this terrible poster fool you. This isn't some straight-to-video Disney kids film trash. This is a surprisingly funny, beautifully acted, poignant film about a young boy's search for God after his grandpa dies. To essentially ask God, "What up, bro? What you doing?" This film is about questioning faith in a world that can be pointlessly cruel and unfair. through the lens of a 10-year-old boy. This film is the prototype to Signs and essentially every one of M. Night Shyamalan's films. It even has the prototype draft 1 version of the miracle conversation from Signs, which I personally think is easily the highlight of his entire career. On my rewatch of M. Night Shyamalan's career, I found this to be the most surprising film in the filmography. An underrated hidden gem that nobody's seen. It is really, really great. I was honestly really surprised and deeply moved by the film, even if the third act has probably the most hilariously unhinged twist of all of his films. I really, really love it. And the only reason it's kind of so high on the list is I kind of love so many of his films, but also I just really love high concept sci-fi and horror genre premises. And this is kind of more of a straightforward drama. And also M. Night Shyamalan is still kind of ironing out the kinks of how he wants to discuss faith. Number 9, The Village. This is the most misunderstood, overhated film in M. Night Shyamalan's filmography. This is a beautiful tale about grief and one's lack of faith in humanity. This is a massive swing for the fence, and I can understand how some people find it a little bit dull and boring. I definitely did as a kid, but upon revisiting it as an adult, I found that there is a lot to love and think about in this film. The visual aesthetic of the film is gorgeous. I absolutely love the yellows and reds that just pop on this very old-timey setting. It has a really great sense of isolation. The performances are spectacular. M. Night Shyamalan's direction of this film is really, really good. I find it creepy when it needs to be, intriguing when it needs to be. The twist in this film is maybe his most infamous, but personally I think it's super underrated and kind of genius. I love the reason for how and why this film takes place, and the very idea of why this village is really heartbreaking and tragic. The twist is shocking, surprising, and it recontextualizes the entire film in a really interesting and thought-provoking way. I love when M. Night Shyamalan does this, where the entire film can be reviewed and you just see it in an entirely new lens. This time around, Shyamalan is discussing the idea of faith when you've lost it in humanity. What do you do when you have lost faith in your fellow man? And taking that to an absolute extreme film movie version, where they go on, they do a big The Village. But then it also starts to discuss some really interesting ideas of parental control and manipulating children to be the way you want them to be in your own image. What happens when parents go, you have to do what I do, and segregating them into their own community and forcing them to live and believe what they believe as parents? And when does that line start to blur when those children start to grow up? All of these things he's discussing about faith, humanity, families. It's all really rich and interesting whilst being very tragic and sad. And I think this film has got so much going for it, so I find it kind of disappointing how much hate it gets. Also, it's got 2 twists, double Shyamalan twist, 2 twists for the price of 1. What more do you want? Maybe a third twist, I suppose. Number 8, Split. James McAvoy is such a good actor. I often wonder, what would it be like if James McAvoy just played every character, Nutty Professor style? This film is a happy middle ground. I love the tone and mood of this film. It is deeply upsetting and chilling. Anya Taylor-Joy is badass in this film. She brings a beautifully tragic and nuanced portrayal to the character. I love how at first she seems very timid, but then throughout the film, due to tragic, horrifying backstory flashbacks, we realize that she's playing a long con and is actually very clever and capable, and all of that I absolutely love. But man oh man, does that end twist come across like an SNL sketch parody of a Marvel post-credit scene. As a scene, kind of terrible. As a moment of hype, and oh boy was I hyped. Shame Glass sucked. Number 7, Knock at the Cabin. Knock knock. Who's there? It's me, Dave Bautista, and I'm gonna ask you an impossible choice that could save the world. I love this film. A terrifying and thought-provoking premise that is so interesting and engaging. This is everything I love about M. Night Shyamalan. A big, high-concept sci-fi premise that is horrifying and chilling. It makes you really go, wow, what an impossible, insane, ridiculous choice, but bringing it to such a small scale that it really makes you go, what would you do? What would you possibly do in that situation? And just the way the film plays with that idea, I find this to be deeply engaging, deeply emotional, and deeply worrying and troubling and kind of upsetting. Like just being like, yeah, like I want to feel for everybody and I would want to sacrifice for the greater good. But when you really put yourself in that situation, would you? Or would you do anything for the people that are in your actual little personal life, the people who actually matter to you, your family, your friends? Do they mean more to you than everybody? But also, What is even going on in this film? Are these people telling the truth? Are they not? There are just so many facets to this film that I find really deeply engaging, and it just makes me think, and I really love that. Not to sound like a broken record, but every single one of M. Night Shyamalan's films tackles faith, and this one, it tackles all of the faiths. Faith in oneself, faith in humanity, faith in other people, faith or lack thereof in a higher purpose, religion. It is discussing so much about faith and what it means to each person, and how every single person comes to it from a different place, and all of that stuff I just find so rich and engaging. And whilst I kind of wanted something a little bit different from the ending and think maybe it would have been interesting to kind of go in a different direction, once again, like all of M. Night Shyamalan's movies, I just love that he took a swing and he went for it. He is just making films unlike anybody else, and even when I don't agree with the choices in the film, I love that he's making choices. Also, Dave Bautista gives his career best performance, and he is officially the best ex-wrestler actor that we have in Hollywood. He is sensational and I absolutely love him. Number 6, Trap. How to Catch a Serial Killer with Taylor Swift. But twist, Taylor Swift is played by M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, who, double twist, is a really good singer. Not a great actor, unfortunately. M. Night Shyamalan made this entire film so that his daughter could perform a live musical concert to people, and that's really nice and sweet. Does it reek of nepotism, or is he just a really nice dad? Why can't it be both? Trap is M. Night Shyamalan's newest film, and it's classic, quintessential M. Night Shyamalan. Josh Hartnett steals the show with a brilliantly captivating and darkly funny performance. He plays Swiftie Dad, who's going to the Eras tour with his daughter, but then he finds out that the entire concert is in lockdown by the cops, and the entire thing is one hilariously elaborate trap by the cops to catch him. Why? Because he's not just any Swiftie Dad, he's a serial killer. This film is as goofy and silly, yet thrilling and captivating as the premise promises. Shyamalan is on peak form, delivering his signature bold and inspired direction, beautifully coupled with his infamously bad, on-the-nose dialogue that I personally find very charming, endearing, and hilarious. And of course there's a twist. Since he's contractually obligated, I didn't love the choices in the third act, but I love that M. Night Shyamalan makes those choices. No one in Hollywood is making films like M. Night Shyamalan. He is so unique and special, and I deeply respect and admire him. Genius or atrocious? Both? Number 5, The Sixth Sense. A brilliant child performance coupled with a beautifully atmospheric and moody film. The tone and mood of this film is gripping and thrilling and haunting. It is a really, really great film. There are some truly spooky and scary moments, and the imagery in this film is haunting. The highlight of the film, I think, is the car scene between the son and his mum, when he kind of reveals what's going on in the film. A really powerful and emotional scene, and a true highlight of the film. But I think the thing that's stopping me from putting it higher on the list is that I feel like the internal logic of the ghosts, maybe doesn't make sense? Maybe. How does he day to day not understand that he's a ghost? How did he not twig? It kind of doesn't make sense to me. But there are so many scenes where it's like, if for a 3-minute moment where he's sitting alone with someone, it works for a scene. How did 45 minutes pass where he didn't notice nobody's interacting with him? How did he really not notice he's a ghost? Do they just not notice? But there are so many different instances throughout the entire film that don't really make sense. I feel like the internal logic scene to scene in the moment, in those 3-minute moments, work. But if you think about scenes outside that we don't see happen in the film that would just be happening in the world, what? Maybe I'm overthinking it. Or maybe he's underthinking it. Sorry, this is meant to be a positive rankings reviewing thing. I just think it doesn't make sense. Number 4, The Happening. An unintentionally hilarious self-parody of his own filmography. Pure genius. This film brings me pure joy. I absolutely love this film. This film is an unintentional comedic masterpiece, and the fact that I know it's unintentional kind of makes it even funnier to me. This film has all the makings of a great M. Night Shyamalan film, but everything is just a little bit off. The beautiful thing about art is that it's subjective, that you can interpret it any way you want. And whilst M. Night Shyamalan might not want me to think of this as a really fun comedy and a parody of his entire filmography, that's how I feel, and I don't hate him for it. I'm not laughing at him, I'm laughing with the film. I love M. Night Shyamalan, and I don't want this to seem like I'm putting it up here as some kind of F you to him. I hope he doesn't ever see this and go, hey, you said you liked me and I'm underrated, but you're putting it up this high? It's clearly not one of my best. Well, guess what? I think it is one of your bests. I have the most fun watching this film out of almost all of them. I love it, and I love that he's unintentionally made a parody of himself. It's kind of wild and insane, and I just find that really charming and endearing. And that's something I find about M. Night Shyamalan. He is charming, he's endearing. I love that so much of his dialogue is kind of on the nose and bad. I love how he makes a film, and when he makes a film that doesn't work, it reminds you of how easily you are able to slip from being exactly, like, it's everything is exactly what should work in an M. Night Shyamalan film. But something is just off, and so it doesn't work at all. In fact, it's horrendous at times. And I love that. Give me this type of unintentional comedy over a Sharknado any day of the week. You know what? I've changed my mind. The Happening is number one. No, that's not true. He actually has one perfect movie, and it's not this one. Number 3, The Visit. Resurrecting his career and found footage films all in one go. Genuinely creepy, upsetting, and terrifying. I love this film. I couldn't believe how much I love this film. I'm not really a big fan of found footage, but I found the choice of found footage in this film to be really interesting. A really interesting perspective, a really interesting choice. I love how it's just filmed by the kids the whole time. It gives a really personal feel, and the reason why they're filming it is sad and heartbreaking and kind of heartwarming. It just does a lot, but also just super upsetting and creepy. What is up with these old people? Are they just old? Are the kids just misinterpreting old people diseases? Or are they possessed? Or are they evil? Are they witches or something? What is going on with these old people? I love it. I love this premise. It's so simple, it's so small scale, and it's so effective. Unnerving, chilling, truly upsetting at times. And outside of the horror elements, it's a beautiful tale of grief, family, and most importantly, forgiveness. This is one of my favorite M. Night Shyamalan films because it is such a good mood piece in terms of the horror and the tension and the scares, but it also just nails all of the emotional character moments. The kids in this film are exceptional. M. Night Shyamalan is so good at getting so much out of children. The emotion, the funny, the cringy kid kind of stuff. It's all so authentic and real and beautiful. And M. Night Shyamalan proves in this film that he has the biggest balls in Hollywood to bookend his terrifying horror found footage film with a 10-year-old boy rapping in the most cringy 10-year-old rapping way ever. The kid absolutely nails the cringy kind of rap that that type of kid would do. Cringe is all hell, and I love it. Or is it maybe unintentional cringe, and this entire film was one big elaborate setup so M. Night Shyamalan could try his hand at rap? Number 2, Old. This is such a wild, insane, high concept idea, and I just absolutely adore it. This is third wave M. Night Shyamalan at his peak. And there are so many things about his third wave as a director that I absolutely love. He has some atrocious, on-the-nose dialogue coupled with some of the most bold, artistically inspired directional choices, and the way they blend together to create something that is very, very funny and silly and dumb, yet somehow also horrifying and terrifying and thrilling. And I think this is the peak example of that. I just love how he blends everything together to tell such an engaging, exciting, hilarious, yet absolutely bonkers film. This film has got some hilarious but insane and horrifying visuals. There is some body horror in this film that is truly wonderful. I love how it takes the premise of a beach that makes you old and it just does everything with that concept. Every idea, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's all there, and it's just so much fun, yet at times it's horrifying and chilling. The atmosphere of this film is so bizarre, and the twist. This is my favorite M. Night Shyamalan twist. This is easily the best twist in any of his films. So many of them do recontextualize the entire film and make it a different viewing experience on a rewatch, but none surprised me and wowed me and made me so giddy with excitement and awe and surprise and shock than this twist. The twist of this film not only recontextualizes the whole film, it just does such a 180 on what you expected and presumed you were watching. I never for a single second would have imagined that Old's twist would be what it is and shape the film in this really fascinating, thought-provoking, and horrifying way. It is such a great concept for a film, but then when you realize what the actual concept of the film is, it's even better. It's so good. It's everything I love about cinema. I bloody love this film so much, and the only reason it's not number 1 is because M. Night Shyamalan has made a definitive 5 out of 5 pure masterpiece. Speaking of which, number 1, Signs. A haunting meditation on faith and a culmination of all the concepts M. Night Shyamalan has been playing with his previous films come to fruition in a perfect exploration of faith, one's loss in faith, but also just a really horrifying, spooky alien invasion movie, focusing around on Mel Gibson's priest who has lost his faith due to an accident that has killed his wife. And so, of course, sing it with me now, this film is about faith. And this film has the culmination of everything he's been trying to discuss with faith with one scene. One moment in this film I feel like is the moment that is the backbone to not just this film, but to his entire filmography and to M. Night Shyamalan as a person. I think it's easily the best scene in any of his movies. I find this one conversation in this film, the miracle conversation between Joaquin Phoenix and Mel Gibson at the couch, is just, it's perfect. A conversation about the two opposing views on miracles. One of faith and one of coincidence. Of people with faith and people without. The scene is profound and thought-provoking and perfect. It also wouldn't surprise you if you've watched Lost to know that my favorite scene in my favorite show of all time is John Locke and Jack Shephard having the exact same discussion of a man of faith versus a man of science. Why do you find it so easy to believe? It's never been easy. I just love this concept. I love this opposing view of the same thing. If a miracle happens, is it God? Is it something beyond us? Is it something more than us? Or is it just a coincidence? Did it just happen randomly? Because random stuff just happens. Or is it divine something? Something bigger and greater than us? Or is it just like a thing that happened that's kind of similar to a different thing that happened? And that's what this whole film is. What does a sign mean? What does a miracle mean? And the way this film explores those things in its back half, where all these moments, these Chekhov guns that pay off, they could be divine miracles, signs of a faith of a higher thing. Or I don't know, man, just like a random thing happened and it happened to save them. The way this film builds off this concept and idea and pays every single one of them off at the end of this film. With the water, with the inhaler, with the baseball bat. It's perfection, it's God tier writing. I absolutely love it because it is playing with the simple idea of cause and effect, of Chekhov's gun, of setup and payoff, but also using those ideas of filmmaking, those very basic concepts of filmmaking, and turning it into the theme of the movie of what is a miracle. How do you interpret a miracle? What if there are signs of something higher? Or is it just signs that, I don't know, random stuff happens and it's just a coincidence? Oh, it's overwhelming. It's one of the best films of all time. It's so very good. And I haven't even talked about all the bits where the aliens do creepy little things and you barely see them. Spectacular. This film is perfect. This film is a masterpiece. And the perfect example as to why M. Night Shyamalan, despite making a couple of really bad films, is still the most overhated, underrated director of all time.